Welcome back to the Steps to Soul podcast. Today, our episode is when to walk away from a deal, even if the price is right. Chris, I think you and I see this more and more often than we used to. Buyers are just getting very specific. Sellers are even to some degree getting more specific. And not to warn anybody, but sometimes you got to know when to walk away from a deal. And I think that's the hardest part that a lot of first-time buyers and sellers kind of struggle with when deals do hit their road bumps, which, as you and Chris, I know they will hit a couple. Man, I'm excited for this topic. How about you?
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. Got a lot of information to cover and go over for people to listen to, and hopefully learn a little bit about when to walk away if everything doesn't line up.
That's right. So let's set the stage here. The deal looks great on paper. The price works. The numbers, for the most part, seem to check out early on before due diligence. So how do you know when it is that time, right? When does that red flag in your head finally say, hey, look, enough's enough. I need to just detach from this deal and move forward? Sometimes it's financials. Sometimes it's just personalities. And sometimes it's just other risks that were not visible on the surface, even to brokers and sometimes even to sellers themselves, for buyers out there listening, didn't know were there. Just kind of pop their head up, right, Chris? We've seen this time and time again. You can do as much homework as you want. It doesn't always mean it's going to be perfect. So let's start with the first main reason, price, right? That's the most common negotiated issue. Why is price the least reliable indicator of deal quality, Chris? For me, you can't out-negotiate people problems, right? You can't personalities and key employees and just culture or something you can't change from the very beginning. They're hard to change in the first place. And sometimes buyers and sellers just don't gel together well. Is that right? I mean, let's be honest. Doesn't mean everybody's going to be friends. You have to love the owner, but if you know you're going to bash heads and that owner's going to stay on or you're going to retain equity with them, better be able to get along, right? Let's make it clear there.
Yeah, price gives people a very false sense of certainty, right? It feels measurable, it's objective. It feels safe to know that you're spending what you need to. You're calculating the ROI. But price is nothing more than a snapshot of what last year looked like. It doesn't say anything about the character of the seller, the stability of the team, and it doesn't tell you what happens when pressure shifts post-close. You've got to use kind of your own instincts and your own just life experience to know what you're getting yourself into. In my experience, people problems don't show up in multiples. There's no 3x of, hey, this seller is going to be a terrible guy to work with, and I'm going to have to spend a year or more or longer with him. What's going to happen is if you enter a bad deal based on price alone and you shouldn't have, it's going to show up later in lawsuits, sleepless nights, just regret in general. You may have nailed the price, but you're going to have this feeling like this is not the right thing and I wish I hadn't done it. Brandon, when you look at a deal, what weighs heavier for you? Is it the price or the predictability of the people involved in the deal?
I think it depends on when the deal was, I think, somewhat consummated as far as the offer. Because before, I think price is the main driving factor of knowing when to walk away. So you have an owner that won't concede anything on price, or an owner that wants way too much and won't even give you relative control, right? Or relative consideration, like, hey, we found out that you lost a big customer, but you still want max price. That's not reasonable, right? At the same time, I look at it more so as for owners who seem agreeable up front, or buyers, and then second they get in, they want to start nitpicking stuff. Well, I want to discount 2% here. I want to discount 1% here. I find that's when you have to say, as an owner, you can't let a buyer just nickel and dime you to death. And as a buyer, you have to realize we talked about this last podcast, correct, Chris, with what to ask before the LOI. Let's stage that a little bit here. It's very important to have a foundation before you move forward, because this is when sometimes buyers and sellers have to realize when to walk away, that, hey, maybe we got this LOI out early and it's great we agreed on quick on price, but we didn't think this through. And there really isn't ability for us to gel or mesh what my exit plan is, maybe a seller would be, your plan as a buyer for me to transition out, and how to transfer the transferability, our favorite word, all these different factors that involve the business, correct? And I think that's where often not asking the questions before and not aligning that is where you have to look in the mirror and say, okay, if the owner's giving me this much pushback, maybe he's not really ready to exit, or what he hopes to do, I know that I can't do this transition in that time. I need to know to stop spending money on this deal, whether it's appraisals, QOV, whatever, move forward, right? We see that time and time again. People say they're going to do one thing, you get the LOI, and then Just because they think they got the price done, they think everything else is going to magically fall into place, and it doesn't. I think buyers anchor at the price because it's tangible and it's easy to think they negotiated. But in reality, and I think sellers do as well, but they don't truly think through the rest of the deal. And that's where you got to know and say, hey, it's just not clicking. But let me ask you this. What are the red flags that don't show up on the financials that aren't necessarily you can find in the QOV or in bank statements that you would say as a buyer, you might want to walk?
I'd say number one for me is if the owner is the business.
Mm-hmm.
You are not buying a company at that point. You're
buying
like
a job.
say you're renting a personality. You're leasing that owner's understanding and knowledge of the business, and you better hope you are able to either incorporate that into a training and transition period and take over all of that he's doing. But if he walks out the door 30 days after the sale's done and you didn't get all his knowledge and everything he does on a day-to-day basis, you are back to reinventing the wheel. You're reinventing this business that you probably could have started easier with less debt service right from the beginning. So that's my biggest red flags. I always ask, if the owner disappears tomorrow, does revenue hold or does it evaporate? How important is this owner? I asked that during probably my first interview with a client that's reached out to me that's interested in selling his business. I want to understand, we're not talking to all employees day one as brokers. So all I've got to rely on is him telling me how involved he is in the business, how much knowledge he has, how much is spread out among key employees. And if key employees don't know a sale is happening, that tells me communication and trust with these key employees might be fragile. I'm not going to say it's a huge issue, but you kind of need to know as a broker what you're walking into, because you're going to have to convey that to buyers that come along. And hey, they're going to want to speak to key employees at some point, if possible. Not always possible, but those are the biggest red flags, is how much concentration of knowledge and information is with this owner.
I think you had a great point too. You kind of alluded on transparency there from the owner. And I understand sometimes owners don't want key employees to know really that it's going to sell. That's understandable. But take it a step further, transparency. If you as a buyer are asking questions, very specific stuff that may not be financially obtainable in a document, like a P&L or some, an issue there, about company inner workings and other faculties. If that owner is hesitant to give you direct answers or starts to beat around the bush and stalls, you need to think very hard how they're going to treat once they get the money in their hands. And the same goes for a seller. If you're asking a buyer, how are you going to finance it? I know you agreed to get SBA financing, for example. How is that going to affect us? Is there anything that's going to change as far as my seller note? What position am I going to be in? If the buyer starts bouncing around to you, Mr. Seller, saying, hey, I don't know, or I'll get an answer to you later, 2-3 weeks go by, 4 weeks go by, you as a seller need to start realizing, dude, this guy may be able to get this job done, get this deal done. And you don't want to keep wasting time and we talked about last week, exclusivity clauses. Don't let that exclusivity clause keep you off the market when a buyer's not being transparent either on their timelines, or worse, won't give you any. And I know we talked about that with the LOI, what to ask before episode last week, but a lot of that carries over, and this is where these red flags are going to pop up, right? This is where these issues are going to be, big problems. And I also ask too, as a buyer in your due diligence, one thing to think about too is, what if the talent leaves? You mentioned that the owner's concentration. What if there's employee knowledge or skill sets that walk away? How are you prepared to do that? I would tell, buyers, understand the outflow of workflow in that company. Understand really who's doing what jobs and why. You may not get to talk to every employee, like you said, but understand that clearly, because if you don't trust that, you're going to get burned. I see that time and time again, especially in like construction or a trade-based business where there might be a very long WIP report, but maybe one employee is the master plumber or the key plumber for those big projects. And if he bails, right, Chris, you're in trouble. You've got a problem.
What do you think a buyer should do if they thought they were buying a company with a full team? That was kind of their initial impression when they read the executive summary per se, and now they're having this conversation with the owner and they start finding out that he is the business. Is that time to walk away or just reevaluate? It can be pre-LOI, post-LOI. That's really going to matter, But should that be enough for a buyer to walk away if they thought they were walking into one thing and then they find out it's something completely different?
I think it gives you very good credence to do so if it's grossly misexaggerated and misrepresented. I think there's always going to be a case where business owners, as you and I know, as being business owners, always do more than something we realize or tangibly acknowledge up front, just because subconsciously you just don't worry about it because you're going to handle it down the road, or it might be once a year kind of item you take care of. That being said, if the owner is the business That's a problem. I have a great case study for that. We had a specialty manufacturer here in the area, and he'd been around for a long time, pretty good cash flow. We brought a buyer in that was going to absorb his operation, roll it up into a much larger advertising company. And we get in there, and he's got the guy has two or three employees, but knowledge shouldn't be that concentrated. First thing the owner goes is, I'm the business. I'm so great. And I know everything. I make sure everything gets done right. I know how to do it. No one else does. And the buyer looks at us and goes, I'm out. I'm walking. That's all I needed to hear was that this owner, because he was trying to he wanted to brag, but it came across arrogant, and it came across as, I know more. You can't live without me. And that just told the buyer, you're not, I don't even want to insult you by renegotiating. I'm just going to walk. Because it's obvious you're not ready to sell, and this company isn't set up to sell. And guess what? It never sold. That was an immediate red flag. And from what we were told, other people could do some of the work. But when it got down to the buy-sell meeting post-negotiation, it turned into the me show, and it just derailed it right there. You could see the look on the buyer's face turn, and that's a good reason to walk, because he's not going to buy this company to do that work. He's got $20 million in revenue. He's buying this to add on as a service to his other operations. And to him, that I can't buy this older guy. Not going to happen. Yeah. How about you? What would you give to a seller that's a massive red flag in perception of, hey, this buyer, we got the LOI in place. We agreed on some principal terms. What would you say when a seller should say, hey, look, enough is enough, or that's a big enough red flag that I need to reconsider?
Early on, I'm dealing with this a lot lately, is delay. When a buyer, there should be a certain, it doesn't need to go along quickly. These deals don't happen quickly. But when months roll by between conversations, and you're checking in, they're still interested, and they're just moving along at a snail's pace, and they keep delaying when that next step is going to be taken in the process. And maybe an IOI comes out, an indication of interest, which is, in my opinion, it's about as worthless as the paper it's written on. It gives you a little.
It's cute, but it's helpful, but it doesn't mean a whole lot.
I like that word. It's a cute IOI. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but when it's a month between the IOI and the next step and an LOI, so as a seller, when you see that, at some point you've got to cut your losses and say, I can't work with this buyer, especially if you've kind of not tied exclusivity to them, because you're not even to that stage yet, but you're tying mindset, emotional energy with this person. You've got to cut that off at some point. We've got one now. The guys, he looked at the business back in September. Great meeting, flew down, met the owner, great meeting, went to lunch, all that stuff. They keep kind of dragging on saying they're going to do stuff, and my seller keeps asking, hey, any word from this? Yeah, I checked in with them. They're not ready to do something. Or he said he had 3 weeks of backlog on his thing of whatever he's got going on. At some point, you just got to stop. And I think that's the last conversation I had with my client is like, let's cut them loose. Like, let's not worry about them. If they come back with an offer, that's great. But let's not talk about them anymore. I don't think they're in the picture. We're here at month 4, month 5. So you kind of lose interest in that.
I think you made a great point there too, and it kind of alludes to a culture mismatch red flag I wanted to bring up is the do it my way culture, or the do it my way deal structure. We sometimes get buyers and sellers that want to do the deal their way, on only their way. When you approach deal making like that, you're going to put yourself in a very hard position, and you're going to often, as a buyer, if you come in and the seller just won't give on anything, won't help, like I mentioned earlier, before you sign that order for an appraisal, if you're getting a loan and you start doing valuations, maybe take a step back and have an honest conversation with the broker and with the seller. Say, hey, I've made an offer. We've agreed on a lot of great stuff. This is not helpful. This is concerning that everything has to be just your way, just your terms. If you can't concede or help me on anything, how helpful are you going to be post-close? And the same goes to a seller, from a seller's perspective, to a buyer. If the buyer, like you said, Chris, they give you timelines, they give you indications, they don't follow up, then, well, our workflow is busy. You've got to wait for us. Well, at some point, you have to meet expectations and facilitate what you said you were going to do and keep your word. And if it's always an excuse and always a problem, as a seller, you have to realize early on, they're not just stalling, they're dragging this out. And that's when you have to say, walk away for your cost and time. Because remember, buyers don't often think, let me take a few steps back here and make sure I propose this to you too, because I want your opinion on this. Sellers forget buyers spend a lot of money on the loan process, doing the valuation, ordering appraisals, engaging the banks, and even possibly their own attorneys and CPAs at certain stages before the APA is done. But buyers often forget too, the sellers may be spending a lot in fees to their CPAs and other advisors to get documentation organized. And I think both sides, Chris, I think, and knowing when to walk away, forget this. If you have red flags popping up, don't spend any more. Stop and hit the pause button. It's okay to hit the pause button, have a recircling of the wagons, right? I think that's probably the most undervalued role that we play as brokers sometimes, is knowing when to say, guys, look, we're hitting this fine line here. Let's take a second. Let's recircle the wagon, whether it's a conference call, a meeting. And if there are any undisclosed concerns, let's get that out right now, right? Have you seen that recently in your deal making? Because we had an issue like that maybe 3 months ago where we had to step in our office and say, guys, look, this is dragging. Let's get you in the office. Let's look across the room from each other and say, we've got 3 contentious points that keep getting pushed back. Before we go any further, let's iron this out.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that on both sides of the fence. One I've dealt with lately is my client, even the seller, not wanting to engage an attorney until like the last possible minute. Why?
Bless.
Because the attorney clock's going to start running. So
Yep,
they
they
don't
get
want to
worried.
spend thousands of dollars for a deal that may fall apart. Maybe they've had deals in their past fall apart, so they're a little gun shy on spending a couple $1,000 or 10,000, whatever the retainer plus a couple hours of attorney time are.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that, and that's almost a red flag for buyers. It's like, hey, we spent a lot. We've done maybe a Q of E. We've engaged our CPAs. We've done hours and hours of due diligence, and now you won't go get an attorney and get this started so our attorney can talk to your attorney. They can start working out this purchase agreement. And yeah, I see that way too often. And that's when I usually step in and try to really help that situation, advise my client, look, it's time to do this. They're working up purchase agreements. They got questions about articles of incorporation, things like this. And, they're needing some documentation that I can't provide. You need to either make this happen or we got to figure out something different. But yeah, big red flag on that.
So let's talk about some other red flags we see. Let's talk about operational chaos, the old saying, how the company runs. We mentioned a few moments here about, certain concentrations of knowledge in employees, the owner maybe being the key employee. But as a buyer, here are things you want to look for. And let's talk about this, Chris. First one for me is if you're looking to buy a company and you think you're buying a company, not a job. Let's make this clear. This is not just buying a one-man shop or a van or maybe a very small 1 or 2 employee company, but you're buying, let's say, 10, 20 employees, right, Chris? A decent amount of management for some people. If you go to buy you get due diligence and you don't find any SOPs, you don't find any operating procedures, any manuals, any instruction, any guides for any part of the company, whether it's HR, and as we know, owners sometimes do handle HR, handle micro roles like that, but there's nothing written down, no mission statements, just the core fundamentals of running the company. At that point, you need to make a hard decision, right? Like, because if you're going to come in and you want to run a company, you're going to have to install these. That goes back to company culture, right, Chris? It's been kind of fly by the seat of your pants. That might be tough. What else do you see as far as operational wise that are red flags that say, hey, as a buyer, I might need to walk?
Yeah, I have a lot of buyers who are looking for businesses that are underperforming. And what they want to do, the word they like to use is they want to optimize them.
Mm-hmm.
There is a huge world of difference between a business that needs to be optimized and one that's fundamentally broken. A messy business can be improved if it's just messy, if it doesn't have things in place it needs to have in place. But a structurally unsound business that's going to consume not only your capital, it's going to consume your energy. You're going to put so much hours and time into that business to get it where it needs to go. You better have the bankroll to do that. Because on a larger business, that's almost like, again, I'm going to go back to reinventing the wheel. You're having to build this business from scratch and starting all over. You've got some pieces in place, but it's broken. My advice is if financials don't tie to the operations or no one can explain how things actually flow through the company, that's not just an inefficiency. That's a huge risk that you cannot ignore going into a business acquisition. Brandon, let me ask you this. How do you distinguish between what you see as opportunity in a business and dysfunction during due diligence? Like if you're looking at 2 businesses, which one has opportunity versus one that's just completely dysfunctional? What's that dysfunction look like?
Great stuff. Opportunity versus dysfunction. First, opportunity is someone who we see all the time, owners hit that plateau, right? They've maybe run the company for 10, 20, 30 years. They're flatlining a little bit. They're not one to put more money in the capital expenditure, or maybe they're just kind of not aggressive. Yes, there's optimization. Maybe it doesn't have a very good website. Maybe there's not a very good POS system tracking all the different back orders. There's a lack of inventory management. There's optimization there. Dysfunction would be, hey, the owner promoted this manager, but he doesn't come in all the time. The place is, declined 20, 30%. I consider that more, there's a problem, because to optimize that, you have to come in and change the whole culture. That's very hard to do. That's not optimizing. That's rebuilding. That's reestablishing brand. We see all the time owners begin to check out or put family members in positions that aren't there, that run off good people. If you look at employee retention and you see that employee retention is very, very short windows, that's dysfunction. You see a company with employees that have been there a long time and it's still profitable, maybe it needs a little bit of juice. That's optimization. And I think that's, like you said, a very fine line to walk. And I think a lot of times people see these opportunities and think, well, I'll just promote the next guy up. He's got to be ready. Not every company has a next man up that's ready. And I think there's a lot of buyer talk today about, well, I'll promote the manager, or I'm going to rely on the manager. There's often a reason why the manager is not doing more. Because as an owner, you and I know, if I have someone I can rely on to do more of my work, I'm going to delegate it. I'm going to follow up with them, but I'm going to delegate it if I can, so I can do other stuff, be more absentee, be more flexible to do other projects. The question then becomes, did the owner pass down enough knowledge, or is there enough capable people there? And too many buyers want to elevate a manager, or when it isn't there and they falsify in their brain that it's possible, elevate them by the company and then realize that person could never help me run this. And now I'm in over my head. And the same goes to sellers listening. If a buyer wants to come in and say, oh, I'm going to promote the manager and do this, and you're looking at yourself going, John's been with me for 10 years. John's a great guy. John cannot run this operation. You need to be upfront about that right away. Because if you're doing a seller finance note, or a bank's doing a loan, and you're tied to that, or you're rolling over equity, you're going to get burned, or you're going to get dragged back in to make it work. And I've seen that before, where owners were like, oh, no, the manager could totally do the job. And it's like, well, if he's been there that long, you've never given him responsibility. Why can he all of a sudden just magically do it, right, Chris? Snap the fingers. It doesn't work like that. Especially in a massive turbulent change in a company's history, which it is when the owner moves on. That's a big moment. Doesn't mean it's going to be bad or chaos, but it is a changing point. It is a newer point, and people are going to feel out what's going to go on. They're going to test the waters. Employees are going to try and see what's happening. You don't want disruption there. You certainly don't want to promote people who aren't ready just to promote them. That, I think, is different than optimization versus dysfunction. And I think buyers often overlook that and confuse the two. That's a great point you made. So we've kind of given some operational red flags. We've talked about some buyer reasons to walk away, but let's dive in a little deeper for buyers out there who are saying, I really want to do a deal, but like a lot of buyers, psychologically it's scary, right? Especially if you're going through SBA, you're committing and personally guaranteeing a lot of money often. You are really leveraging the house, right, Chris? No pun intended. So obviously, we can talk about financial issues, but outside of financials, what is some key reasons for you that a buyer should say, hey, you know what, this is a fork in the road moment for me. Go down the deal or walk.
Yeah, I think you need to look at, this one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but if you look at a company's financials, they've been in business for a really long time, but they still have a high amount of debt. Not saying you should walk away from the deal, but you definitely need to pull out the magnifying glass and say, why are you still dealing with so much debt? And why is the key one, you don't even need the balance sheet for that. Go to the P&L. Mm-hmm. What is their interest expense? How much is interest dragging on this? And I think that's where the argument of EBITDA, whether it means something or not, mm-hmm. Because if they're having to make so many capital expenditures and they've got so much debt and interest, you've got this EBITDA. It makes us feel nice and fuzzy that, hey, this is the number we've all agreed is something that we can attach to as a multiple mm-hmm. and value a business. But I've got businesses right now with hundreds of thousands of interest expense on the books. And it kind of speaks to like a buyer coming in and buying this company. Is that going to continue? Am I going to need to keep doing that? Mm-hmm. And so before you go buying into the EBITDA, you've got to look at what the capital expenditures, what the interests are. That's really signaling you to a problem that probably needs to be closely examined.
I think you're right.
What do you think about at what point does structure matter more than valuation in your decision, as far as what you're looking at on the books, Brandon?
I think it comes down to, can I actually replicate it? And I think that might be a vague answer, but let's kind of narrow that down a little bit. The owners always run the business a certain way that they want to run it. And you made a great point about looking at the debt. We've seen companies that start going into factoring or leveraging their capital. The question there becomes, why are they so cash strapped? Is it a personal commitment to not wanting to put more money in the company for fear it won't make it? Is the owner indicating that? Is it also a possibility that maybe you're not someone's not pricing these jobs correctly or pricing your product correctly. And that's why you keep coming up short or having to borrow a little bit here, a little bit there to sustain yourself. So now the question is, does the company structure, as far as who I have in the right positions to make these orders, empowered to bid or go out there and get these jobs or sell these products, is there an actual risk there where I don't think we can now go to our customers after I buy it and raise prices 5%, right, Chris? Does that make sense? Or if you're doing, for example, like an economy of scale, does their systems, does their POS system, does their data retention, does their CRM fit and merge? Does their sales structure merge with how I want to run the company, or fit if I'm doing an acquisition to merge into my other group? Is that going to mesh together, correct? Because we've seen times where a competitor wants to buy out another person and realizes the way they run their field crews will never work with my field crews. I've seen owners flat out tell me, here's a great story. We've maybe told it before in the podcast, but it's just fits this perfectly. Owner had a buyer, wanted to pay more money, had an industry strategic wanting to buy him out in HVAC, and he said, quote, the guy not industry wants to bring in to run this company will run my people off. Yes, I'll get more money, but the manager he wants to bring in runs it like that operation that I know, my guys will all quit, and it will not be successful. I'm taking the other guy because he's going to run the same strategy in the same culture that I have here. He's going to run the field the way I want to run it in the field, and my guys will respect that. And he said, I had a guy who used to work for him that came to work for me. He's not going to be happy, but we told the buyer that up front. Like, hey, it's going to happen. You might lose one guy, but that was disclosed. The owner identified the red flag that he would know from his industry experience and said, no, that structure doesn't work. I'm going to walk away from the higher offer and take a little bit lower offer, but know the chance of it succeeding and executing is much higher, and I feel better for my team. It wasn't about greed. It was about making the right decision. That's where structure matters, I think.
Yeah, that's always smart. It's not always about price. It's about, especially guys who have been through the process before, maybe in their life, and they understand how quickly a deal can go sideways or just fall apart, retrades, renegotiate. So if you've got somebody you feel confident in that maybe is 5-10% lower than a better offer that you don't feel confident in, it's worth it every day, all day long.
Let's talk about some red flags with financing, because I think that's often where a lot of deals do collapse and when buyers start to feel the pinch. Let's talk about when it's okay to walk away there, because I think that's a misunderstood topic to some degree about what can be done. As you know, the debt service coverage ratio is typically for SBA 1.15 is the bare minimum, right, Chris? That's kind of like the floor, but really they like it to be higher. As a buyer, I recommend to you, when you're doing your deal and looking at and you're recalculating cash flow or EBITDA, you're making sure the cash lines up. Run a stress test. And as a buyer, if your stress test tells you you're barely going to make it or you're just hitting the margin, is it worth to do that deal? You have to know, does your risk tolerance accept that you are flirting on the very edge of this deal being underwritten? And if not, what can you do to offset that? Right, Chris? Whether it's ask the seller to take a seller finance note in a second position for 2 years down the road. Is it, do I have to renegotiate price? Or is it, hey, look, this deal just, there's not enough meat on the bone revenue-wise and cash flow-wise to be done safely, right? It's not worth the risk. And I think a lot of buyers just, they keep clawing at a deal. They keep trying to refine a way to restructure their deal. They keep trying. If it's because it's that lean, it may not be doable. It's okay to walk away if it's that lean, right, Chris? I see often there's a difference between restructuring because you want to make a little more cash flow and you want to find a way to give yourself some protections versus we are scraping every piece of meat off the bone and it's not enough to fill up the tank, right? Talk a little bit about that, because I see a lot of times buyers don't know when to say it's just not going to happen. It's just, you just got to know when there's not enough meat to finance it.
Yeah, if you're barely hitting the SBA minimum guideline of 1.15 to make this deal work, you probably
need to
shouldn't
renegotiate or walk.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Either that or you need to come up with some more cash down. And if you can't do that, then you're really going to be tight. The SBA will give you some working capital, but it's not going to be a ton of money.
It's still more money you owe back.
Yeah, exactly. And typical, I see maybe $100,000 in smaller deals that they're willing to give. I don't think I've seen anything larger than $200,000 or $300,000 for working capital. They don't go out and give you $2 million of working capital or anything.
Well, you have a $5 million cap, so if you're at $4.5 million, you really can't get too much more working capital.
No, they're not. They're not
with closing costs added in too.
That's right. So you got to also look at it, and they're going to look at it like this. So before you head down this road, they're not only looking at what your debt service of buying this company is, they're going to look
Mm-hmm.
at your personal debt obligations. What's your house note? What's your
Mm-hmm.
car notes? Do you owe your kids college tuition? Are you paying that back? What other obligations do you have? And you need to
Mm-hmm.
factor that in because they are. And if you can't make that work, then you've got to be concerned. The other thing you mentioned a seller note. I get really concerned about those for buyers because what's that saying is like, let's say it's on standby for 2 years. Yeah, you've got a 2 year runway where you pay a little less per month. But what happens if you don't grow that business in 2 years?
Yep.
All of a sudden, that 2 year clause kicked in, and that seller note is probably not as long as your SBA note. It may
Nope.
be up to 10 years if
But it's
your
going to
seller
crunch
was
your
willing
cash
to do
flow.
that. Yeah, but now you've got this additional cash flow, and if everything stayed the same or even declined, now you've got this added stress, added debt. So I wouldn't look at a 2 year push off as a kind of a saving of the deal. I'd say that's more like, hey, we know we can make this work. We've got economies of scale we're going to build in, or we know exactly what we're going to do. But if you're just buying it on a hope to, you know, that
It's just going to
somehow you
grow because it's
scale
going to
this up, yeah,
grow.
yeah. If you don't have that plan, I would highly advise against that.
And that goes back to optimization versus structural issues. And
All
that's
right.
where I think often that's used as leverage. And I think buyers misalign their thoughts there. And like you said, that cash flow, that debt service is going to rise at year two. And if there really were structural issues and you didn't correct it, you're going to be in the hole even more. Whereas if there is optimization, that's your runway to get it going. I would say too, for sellers involving financing terms to walk away or issues to walk away from a deal, if someone is asking you to seller finance or do an earnout, and they're not putting enough on the table or they're not willing to guarantee you something, you need to be very serious about looking at this and going, it's not worth it. Right? We did a deal recently where the SBA financing fell apart and the buyer still wanted to move forward. They knew the owner and the seller, the owner and the buyer knew each other very well. So there was a relationship there which helped. There's goodwill, right? We talk about goodwill all the time on the podcast, Chris. And they said, look, I'll take a little less and I'll seller finance a very large portion of this deal, but I need some guarantees. And the buyer said, totally fair with that. I've got rental property I will leverage and put up as direct collateral on top of the seller finance note. Hard assets, hard collateralized, personally guaranteed. That makes sense to go forward. If you as a seller have someone approaching you that does not put at least 50% down and especially won't guarantee anything, you need to walk away. Especially if they're asking you to give more an asset value than what they're putting down, you need to know when to walk away. And that's a key time to do it because they're going to flip. If they go wrong, they're going to flip that deal and make money on selling the assets off and take off if you don't have it properly structured, right, Chris? We've seen that before. So if the buyer's doing terms like that, probably time to walk or say, hey, look, you want to do this deal? I need guarantees. It's not on good faith. There's good faith involved, but I can't leverage, $300, $400, $500 million on good faith you're going to show up with the seller finance note, right? You need to give me some kind of guarantee or something to leverage against. And if not, then go to the bank. If you can't do that, then this is not the deal for you. And that's where we get dragged in a lot, let's be honest, as brokers. Let's talk about what we do and what we see to prevent these situations from happening. I know I've told you from many of my personal experiences, we see this coming and questions we asked before the LOI, referring back to last week's podcast. You should go listen if you haven't, because it's going to tie in a lot to this one about, hey guys, deal structure asking these questions matter because when you get to this point, like, hey, I'm going to want seller financing. If the owner isn't agreeable to it, you're going to not get further. But if they are agreeable, you want to lay out some conditional terms. What do we see a lot of times with seller finance notes for deals that maybe don't underwrite perfectly, Chris? One solution we've done in the past is use a balloon note. We'll say, hey, look, Mr. Seller, I get you don't want to wait 10 years to get your deal. And buyer, you don't want it that long either. But we can't seller finance this large portion in a short amount of time, right, Chris? We can't do it in 5 years. So here's what we're going to do. Let's amateurize it over 10 to 15, have a 3 to 5 year seller note with a balloon note at the end, for those of you listening, where then the remaining lump sum is due and payable at that time. At that point, the buyer has had the company for 3 to 5 years. They should have no problem going down to the bank and getting, if they need a loan, to pay off the rest. That's very, very reasonable, right?
Yeah.
This is where sellers, and if a seller's not want to work with you, Mr. Buyer, be careful.
Yeah, no, that's good structure. I like the balloon note, and like you said, as long as they've been running the business profitably, they're not headed off the cliff. They should be able to get that refinance, get a line of credit. At the very least, maybe tap into a home equity line of credit or something like that to cover it. But yeah, that balloon note can be scary too. I can imagine if you If no bank's willing to work with you at the time, that's going to be probably a problem too.
It is. It's what to be expected. What other roles and ideas do you see that brokers bring to the table? Not to pat ourselves on the back here, but that add value, that help kind of say, hey, these are red flags to walk away, or hey, here's how we solve these red flags.
Yeah. You said to the table. I'm going to say the one thing I do is sometimes it never shows up at the table. It never shows up at the closing table. Sometimes it's telling your client when to pull the plug. It's the deals that we stop early. Yeah, it's the deals that don't even make it to the closing table because there's going to be a bigger issue. There's going to be your seller notes in jeopardy if there's one on the line. There's lawsuits involved, or are you just this is going off the rails, and we can try to use our very best force to pull it back together. But some deals just need to go away. Some deals need to die. I hate to say it that way because my job is to make deals, and that's the only way we get paid. But, professionals like us understand that not all closings can be a success. If it avoids years of regret, years of, just things going wrong. Yeah, we've got pattern recognition. We understand when we see a pattern that we've already gone through once in our brokerage careers. And knowing that and seeing the train wreck and telling our clients that, hey, this is where this is headed. We can try this, but if that doesn't work, we need to kill this deal. What kind of patterns do you see and some signals that indicate that it's time to pull the plug?
For me, it's not meeting deadlines time after time and stories not lining up. Or worse, that we're ourselves or the seller are not allowed to be in contact with the lender. To me, that's a massive red flag, and to say, hey, why are you keeping us out of the circle? We don't have to know every detail. But if there's a lack of communication and a resistance to allowing that, that's a problem. Because it takes the whole team to get the deal done. And when I see buyers specifically, sectioning off and not allowing contact or really not giving fair terms or not disclosing that, that's a problem. I think one of the first things I always ask for, Chris, and a red flag to sellers, and I warn them, when that buyer wants to do a loan, get us the term sheet. Let me see the actual term sheet. Don't tell you the banker gave it to you. We need production of it. We need to see it and review it. Because I've had buyers who told me they got the term sheet and there was a mistake on it. And had we seen it early, we would have caught it. Instead, we went, you and I know a deal specifically. We won't reference it. Got far down the line, found out, oh, no, that was the wrong term sheet. It's like, that's not what you sent us. Now, we salvaged it. I mean, you did a lot of work to salvage that. But that does happen. To me, that and process fatigue. When you've got one side or the other that just can't, I mentioned deadlines, but just seems to be getting longer between the response times. First, it was a day to get a response. Now it's 2 days. Now it's 5 days. Okay, something's going on. Why are you delaying? Is it because you don't want to do the sale? And sometimes our job is to confront the party and say, do you really want to do this deal or not? Because it seems like you're trending away from it. And that's okay to tell us the truth. Don't be afraid to be honest about deal fatigue, because that's where things tend to get rocky and emotions and goodwill gets burned out. Because if you do have issues, like I mentioned earlier, let's sit down and discuss them. And if we can't resolve them, let's cut the deal. And if we can, great, we're reinvigorized. We've done it. We've got over the hump. What's left? What's the call to action?
Great point. Delay is one of the biggest ones. I've dealt with that a lot lately. Dealt with it at a gas station here lately. I was trying to sell. We had buyers in place, LOI, moving towards closing. Delays kept happening.
Never hit those markers, right? Never once.
Yeah, and the appraiser would never come out, and I don't have access to the appraiser, so I'm reaching out to the banker. I guess the banker didn't like my tone with him, so he actually cut off communication with us, just like you just said. And come find out, the buyers never applied for their liquor license for this gas station. So they were delaying because they didn't want to, the seller was not willing to do the typical thing in our state, which is, hey, I'll let you use mine. She wanted to do things legal in the right way and not jeopardize herself or put herself in any more liability. It's a tight process on that. We can go into that another day. But yeah, that delay, they just wanted to keep delaying. And this was not something that was just the first delay. This was like the third delay. And this thing had drug on for month after month. We were probably 2 months past our deadline. And so I went to my client and said, what do you want to do? I recommend pulling the plug. I don't know when this thing's going to close because these guys just keep coming up with excuses and, one after another. So we took it off the market, put it right back on next day, literally next day, back under contract, set to close in a couple weeks, So sometimes you just got to pull the plug. We've got a better offer in place now. We've got better buyers. They're more responsive. So sometimes doing the hard thing actually is the best thing.
You're right. And sometimes you got to stick with the hard thing, not to counteract your point. But I've seen some sellers where we had to tell them, look, I know you want to walk, but from what you told us you need in your timeline to get out is urgent. Maybe there's a health issue or moving. You're going to have to stick with this deal. You can't afford to walk away because we may not be able to find another one. And I know that might be counteractive to what we've talked about this entire podcast, but let's be clear. There are times when this is the only deal you're going to get and you can't afford to walk away. You're going to have to make concessions, and you're going to have to realize that this process is not going to be good for you. Do you have another 6 months and you need to go through the deal again to find someone else? We've done that. We had a deal for a staffing company a couple of years ago. Bigger group was going to, strategic buyer in the region was going to buy them. Green lights all the way through. Get to the end, get crickets getting close to closing day. What's going on? Something's up. Find the buyer calls and said, look, we had a change in management ownership structure, pulling the plug. Great, right? But now to the main point. Buyer's like, well, what do we do? We should cancel. Like, look, you're going to throw away $1 million plus company because you just got frustrated. That was out of your control. Don't walk away. We'll find you another deal. And we did. And finally said, hey, we know somebody might want it. It's not great, but we'll give them a discount. And at first it was, it's too little. But then they said, we want to do the deal. And we said, if you really want to get out, this is a good shot to get out. Or do you want to go try another year to find premium price again? And they said, no. We said, then take this deal, right? We've got a great lender who can do the deal right now. This person meets all the qualifications. We can really run. Sure enough, we ran. Thank you, Mr. Huey, Train and Byline Bank. We got it done. Shout out to Huey. He's always done a bunch of good deals for us. Sometimes you got to hang in there. And then, you're going to get demoralized. And sometimes you just got to understand that buyer walked, and if you bring back new terms, they're not going to renegotiate. Some buyers just have to walk away. They don't have it in them. That's okay. I see a lot of sellers make concessions. It's fair to make concessions when it's necessary. It's unfair for one side to always demand concessions from the other, no matter what. And I think you and I, Chris, can talk about that for days, but that is the biggest issue I've seen is it's my way or the highway. I want my concessions. Just that approach will kill your goodwill, and it will kill your deal faster than anything I've ever seen. How about you?
Yeah, it's when it starts becoming one-sided, and it's always one party. In my case, it's usually the
one
buyer.
Party feels abused or feels taken advantage
exactly.
of.
Sellers start feeling abused. You can only take so much, and then you're gonna push back, or you're gonna kill the deal, whichever comes first. And that's a sad place to be in, especially if a lot of work's been done on both sides, and the due diligence has been done. But yeah, it happens a lot in the retrade renegotiation phase. They done due diligence, and now if you got a valid reason, I get it. But a lot of times they don't. I will say that I've seen it more often than not. They're coming up with some reason, and they want to maybe put more into the seller note, which maybe it's not a retrade on price, but it is a cash at closing.
It is a renegotiation.
It is. It's not what we signed up for. And, you're months into this deal. Seller's emotionally invested. He's already counting his money. He's got his trip planned to Bahamas and all that stuff. And now we've got to discuss how to move forward from here. So it's an unfortunate situation, but it is part of deal making 101 and something we deal with more often than not.
You're right. And I think a lot of these negotiations come into play when both buyer and seller want to maintain their lifestyle and aren't willing to renegotiate or at least understand that their lifestyle is going to change. I've seen so many sellers want to be involved post-close, but want to live the lifestyle as the owner, but want none of the risk, right? Have we seen that?
Yeah.
And a buyer just tells them, man, I can't afford to pay you that and make a living and make debt service. I'm not buying this company for you to live your lifestyle. I'm buying this to live my lifestyle. Yes, I have to make concessions, but you don't get to sell the company and be the king. And I have seen that. I've seen buyers walk away. We've had owners that just demanded all these things, and the buyer said, that's ridiculous. You don't own the company anymore. I'm not going to give you the entire expense account and you get to have a free truck mileage, and you get to go on the vacations, and you keep the co-op component. That's absurd. What am I buying then, right? Yeah. At the same time, for sellers, to buyers, I've seen a lot of buyers want to do a deal where it structures for when they take over, they don't change their lifestyle. And my issue is, you're buying a business in our company, you need to be in there. You're going to have to change your lifestyle for a while to realize this, especially my favorite people, the cash flow chasers that want the absentee ownership, right, Chris? And I've seen buyers come in and start, can I elevate management? And how much little work can I do? And owners start going, this guy doesn't want to buy this business. He wants to buy the cash flow. He doesn't want to buy and understand and run and learn this company. As an owner, that's a big red flag to say this buyer doesn't have what it takes, or he's going to be a problem down the road because he's not going to invest time, effort, and money into this, and then he's going to fail and know who he's going to blame, Chris.
Yeah.
Going to blame the owner, the former owner, I should say, for not being disclosed enough or not being fair. You have to identify those red flags, and we do a lot of that in the screening process, correct? But sometimes those people do work their way in with their stories and their misrepresentations, and you get to deal making, they start saying, well, I only work 40 hours a week at my current company. I don't want to work more than 40 hours a week. You're a business owner, man.
Yeah.
Get ready to work.
As a seller, this kind of sums up our when to walk away as a seller portion.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got any seller financing involved and you're looking at this buyer and you know they can't run this company, and
even
they only want to work 10 hours a week, you're hearing all these things. If you can't live without that seller note, you need to kind of wipe that away. So if you got $1 million sale,
could you do without?
Yeah, 20% in seller financing. If you can't live with $800,000, do not do that deal, because this buyer is doing exactly what he says he's going to do. He's going to work 10 hours a week, and that doesn't work for your company. You're putting in 40, 50 hours a week, and you've been doing it for 20 years. You know everything it takes, and you're still working that much. So this guy's looked at the financials, and like you said, he's a cash flow chaser. He sees $300,000 at the bottom line, and he's like, I want that, and I can buy that. Yeah, you can buy that, but if there's any seller portion involved, you will probably not get that.
Yep, and even if they gave you a full price offer on the LOI,
exactly,
great terms, understand what's coming on the back end of that deal.
That's right.
And for buyers out there, this is a key point for you. Know what lifestyle you want to live before you get to this point. We talked about the questions to ask before the LOI in the box. I'm going to keep referencing back because it ties so well into this topic. Know what lifestyle you want to live, and if you're not willing to do that, especially in the first few months and year where you're going to be spending more time than you probably will once you get settled in, understand that that's the terms you need to reflect in your LOI to this point, and understand how you absorb that and work with the owner. I talked to a client who listened to the podcast, was looking at buying a little bit of a smaller business. He has a good job now, and he said, you know what, I realized I like the business, but I don't want to quit my job for that kind of cash flow. I can do better. I can find more. And he had to learn to walk away and say, I don't want to get stuck doing that job if I have to. He realized that's not what I want to do. So before he got too far along, he walked away from his deal, and bravo to him, because don't buy something you don't love and want to do. Even if there's going to be days you wake up in bed saying, I really don't want to go to work. We all have those mornings. But if you really had that disdain or that question already, you need to walk. Especially if you're going to leverage and do financing, like you said, Chris. Don't put yourself in that position. Know that you want to do this, that you're excited, and that you have energy and optimism. If that's the case, great. And sellers, you should be able to identify that very quickly. You'll know that by the questions they're asking and what they're looking to do. And a great indicator of their flexibility, Chris, is during deal making, speaking of red flags, if there's always an excuse, hey, my kid got sick, I can't get this done this week. Hey, my wife's out of town, I'm not doing this. Hey, I got family coming in town, I'm busy, I can't get the deal done next week. If there's that many roadblocks to get in the way of them doing a deal, that's going to apply to them running the company, handing it off, right? I've seen buyers say, oh, I'll be there next week to start training. Well, I had something come up. I had to miss 2 days of training. In my 30 days, I negotiate with the owner. That's a red flag. But you saw it coming based on how they weren't making appointments on time. They weren't upholding their goodwill. Massive red flags. Sometimes you just got to walk from those guys, no matter how great they sound and how nice they are and the compliments they give you, both sides. And that goes to buyers. If the owner's not keeping his timelines, he's always rescheduling and moving stuff, maybe there's indication. Maybe he's working more than he says he is, and he can't be available. Or maybe the company can't function without him being there 80 hours a week. If you don't want to live that lifestyle, walk. Don't spend the money on appraisals. Don't spend the money on CPAs. Don't spend the money on attorneys. Don't get to that point having not resolved your mentality and that mindset that's locked in. Correct, Chris?
For sure.
One thing I mentioned to you, my final takeaway I'm going to give here as far as things to watch out for, because I think it's the most obvious but often kind of brushed aside issue, is a toxic work culture with family members involved. And some people say, oh, well, they just don't get along. The new owner can fix that. If you've got family members fighting, you don't know what else under the cracks is of what team members are picking sides. I've seen this in bigger deals where there was 2 or 3 kids involved, maybe mom or dad or vice versa. Oh, no, everyone's friendly. But you can tell going around that these two don't talk in the room, or they sit away from each other. If there's a toxic relationship brewing amongst a family, the employees have picked sides too. and you don't know which ones are backing who. And you need to be willing to immediately upfront, as a seller, disclose you've had some issues, but as a buyer, say, what's really going on? Is this repairable, or is this already in disarray and you're just trying to unload it now before it collapses? You can't fix family problems for them, but if they're not willing to disclose and really highlight those issues, it's okay. We've all had family businesses. We've all had fights. There's a difference between a fight and an outright just disagreement and the walls are up, right, Chris? And I've seen that, and families try and hide it. And as a buyer, if there's a family business, make sure to ask, have there been any family fights? Are there any family issues tied into this? Did someone leave recently because of this? Know that, because that could signal a culture issue or a management issue or a philosophical issue to the company you need to know about before you go forward.
Yeah, at the end of the day, price is not going to fix people, whether
It's not.
you're the buyer or the seller. You're getting the price you want as a seller. If this buyer is not the right fit, if they're going to come in and create a toxic environment for your employees and your seller financing any portion. And for a buyer, just because you got the right price from the seller, you lowballed him, he took your price, you may be buying the biggest headache. He may be so willing to unload this for a lowball offer.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case,
Yeah.
you should wonder why he's taking so little. You know, culture is inherited. I agree with you on the family matters. I've dealt with that in businesses before in a number of different ways. I would tell you integrity is non-negotiable in deals.
Yes.
If you're buying a company and you start to feel that the seller is not a person of good character, that probably runs through the business to its core. That's not something you can fix overnight, if you can even fix it at all.
No.
And I think discipline in doing deals, whether you're buyers or sellers, brokers, discipline is what separates the experienced people from amateurs. Knowing these cues, knowing how the momentum's flowing, knowing what to chase and when to stop chasing it. But the goal is not to close more deals. The goal is to close the right deals.
That's right. That is so well said. I love that. One thing I forgot to mention that I want to highlight to people still listening, because this might be you one day. If the owner, as a buyer, if the owner is going to be the landlord post-close and you don't like them, don't buy the business. Because if you're in bed and they're the landlord, they control your destiny. That's a key factor. I forgot to mention that. But that applies to any business. So if you're buying a business and you don't like the landlord, say you're not getting the property with you, or the owner tells you the landlord's a dick, he always gives me trouble, always wants to raise the rate. That's a massive red flag you might want to walk away from. Because if security of where your business operates can be put in jeopardy or threatened or leveraged against you, you don't need to be there. I don't know how I forgot to mention that, but I just want to add that one last little bit. My second final takeaway, forgive me, that I want to make sure I got in there because I had a total brain fart and forgot to mention it. But on that note, Chris, I think we covered a lot of the great overall topics. Yes, there's some nitty gritty we can get into. If you've got questions about your deal out there for you, those listening, we've got way more insight into different little subsections we could give you some good tips and pointers on. You're more than welcome to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and also help you if we can. We've been doing this a long time. We've seen a lot of random scenarios pop up. We got some pretty good ideas how to fix them, right, Chris?
We sure do. Yeah, a lot of stories in the backlog to go into if we wanted to.
Good brokers look for solutions, not for ultimatums. And if you're getting ultimatums, sometimes they're necessary, but a lot of times it's because somebody isn't willing to really work with you, and that's the red flag to keep an eye on. But on that note, this is the Steps to Soul podcast. I am Brandon Bourgeois. My co-host, Christopher Sater. We're glad you're here today. We will see you in a coming week with another great episode. Until then, thank you for listening.